For 17 months, no one outside the White House knew who was running the United States. In this episode of The Great War, we explore one of the most consequential cover-ups in American history, the Woodrow Wilson stroke that left a president incapacitated and transformed his wife into what some historians have called America's first shadow president. Last episode, we saw how the United States flooded France with troops to end the fighting. But winning the war was only half the battle. The Wilson secret illness that followed would contribute directly to the Treaty of Versailles failure and America's refusal to join the League of Nations. Edith Wilson, shadow president in all but name, would preside over a deception so thorough that it reshaped the American World War I aftermath for generations. But to understand how a nation lost its leader without knowing it, we have to go back to the autumn of 1919. The war was over. The treaty was signed. But back in Washington, Wilson faced a battle that no battlefield victory could win. The United States Senate had to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, and powerful senators were determined to stop it. Wilson made a fateful choice. He would take his case directly to the American people. In September of 1919, he set out on an extraordinary cross-country speaking tour, roughly 8,000 miles by train, with dozens of speeches planned in cities and towns across the nation. The pace was punishing. According to multiple historical accounts, Wilson was already in poor health before the tour began. He had reportedly suffered from severe headaches and exhaustion throughout the Paris Peace Conference. Some historians believe he may have experienced a minor stroke or cardiovascular episode as early as the spring of that year. But he pressed on. City after city, speech after speech. According to accounts from those who traveled with him, his condition visibly deteriorated as the tour continued. Then, on September 25, 1919, after a speech in Pueblo, Colorado, something broke. Wilson reportedly collapsed. The remaining tour dates were canceled. The presidential train turned back toward Washington, and what the public was told was almost nothing. On October 2, 1919, according to widely published accounts, Wilson suffered a massive stroke inside the White House. The left side of his body was reportedly paralyzed. His vision was said to be severely impaired. What happened next remains one of the most extraordinary episodes in the history of the American presidency. Wilson's personal physician and his wife Edith reportedly made a decision together. They would control all access to the president. No cabinet member would see him without their approval. According to historians, even the vice president was not given a full accounting of the president's condition. For weeks, and then months, Edith Wilson became the gatekeeper of the executive branch. Documents that required the president's attention were filtered through her. She later wrote in her memoir that she decided what was important enough to bring to her husband and what could wait. She called it her stewardship. Critics, then and since, have called it something else entirely. Some historians describe it as the closest the United States has ever come to an unelected shadow presidency. How much governing did Edith actually do? The truth is, historians still debate this. What seems clear from the historical record is that she controlled the flow of information, who could speak to the president, what he saw, what he didn't. And the nation had no mechanism to challenge this. This is where the cover-up collided with history. The Senate was locked in a bitter fight over ratification. Opponents had attached a series of reservations to the treaty, conditions that would have limited American obligations under the League of Nations. Some historians argue that a healthy Wilson might have negotiated. He might have accepted a compromise. He had shown flexibility before. At Paris, he had made concession after concession to bring the treaty into existence. But the Wilson who lay behind those closed White House doors was, by many accounts, not the same man. According to historians and those who eventually gained access, his personality appeared to have shifted. Reports describe him as rigid, suspicious, and unwilling to consider any modification to the treaty. In November of 1919, the Senate voted. The treaty failed. It was brought back for another vote in March of 1920. It failed again. The United States of America, The nation whose president had personally designed the League of Nations would never join it. The consequences rippled across decades. Without American participation, the League of Nations lacked the authority and power that Wilson had envisioned. Some historians argue this weakness contributed to the League's inability to prevent the crises that led to the next World War. Wilson left office in March of 1921. He died in 1924, a broken man who had staked everything on a vision of international peace and watched it crumble from behind locked doors he could barely leave. The 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified in 1967, was drafted in part because of what happened during those hidden months. It established, for the first time, a formal process for transferring presidential power in cases of incapacity. It took nearly 50 years, but America remembered what secrecy had cost. The Wilson stroke remains a haunting reminder that the fate of nations can hinge not on battles or treaties, but on the fragile health of one human being and the choices made by those standing closest to power. Next time on The Great War, the story of Serbia's desperate retreat when a dying nation marched hundreds of thousands of refugees over frozen mountains in one of the most harrowing episodes of the entire conflict. The Great Retreat of Serbia. That story is coming next. Subscribe. We uncover a forgotten story from World War I multiple times a week.